I've been married twice in my life. The first time, I was 26 years old, and too young and too stubborn to know what I didn't know. That ended quietly, the way a fire goes out when there's nothing left to burn. The second time, I thought I finally understood what I was doing. I thought I had learned enough from 62 years of living to recognize a good thing when it was standing right in front of me. I was wrong about that. Her name was Diane Harlow. She was 54 years old when we met, which meant she wasn't young, and neither was I. And I remember thinking that was actually something to be grateful for. We weren't two kids stumbling around in the dark. We were adults. We knew ourselves. Or so I believed. I'll tell you how we met, because it matters to the story. A friend of mine from my years working construction in Nashville had moved to Chattanooga after his own divorce, and he invited me down for a long weekend to see his new place and watch some football. I drove down on a Friday afternoon in October. His neighbor across the street was having a get-together, nothing fancy, just a back porch and some people standing around with drinks in their hands, and my friend walked me over to say hello. That's where I met Diane. She was wearing a dark green sweater and talking about the Tennessee Volunteers with a kind of confident authority that I found immediately attractive. She had dark eyes and a good laugh, and she didn't pretend to be impressed by things that didn't impress her. I respected that. We talked for 3 hours that night. I drove back to Nashville on Sunday with her phone number saved in my contacts and a feeling in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. I want to be honest with you about that, friends, because I think it's important. I was 61 years old, and I felt like something in me had come back online after a long time of being switched off. That's how she made me feel. And that feeling, that warmth, that sense of being chosen by somebody good is what made everything that followed so difficult to process. We dated for 14 months before I proposed. I want you to understand that I was not rushing. I was deliberate about it. I asked her to marry me because I had spent more than a year watching who she was in ordinary moments, not the dressed-up moments, not the special occasions, but the Tuesday evenings and the rainy Sunday mornings and the times when things went sideways and you find out what a person is actually made of. In all of that time, she seemed solid. She seemed real. There was one thing, though. One thing that I had pushed to the edge of my thinking and kept telling myself was not as strange as it felt. Her family. Diane was from rural Kentucky. She'd grown up in a small town called Harlan, about 4 hours northeast of Chattanooga. She had a mother and a father. She'd told me their names early on, Ruth and Earl Whitfield, and a younger brother named Danny. She talked about them in the past tense, the way you talk about a chapter of your life that has closed. She said she and her parents had drifted apart after she left for college, that they were simple people and she had built a different kind of life, and that there was no bad blood, just distance. She said it the way you say something you've rehearsed. I noticed that. I filed it away. When I brought up meeting them, the first time was about 6 months into our relationship. She smiled and said, "Sure, someday. Let's not rush it." The second time was around month 10. She said her father's health was unpredictable and the timing wasn't right. The third time was after I proposed. I told her I wanted to meet her parents before the wedding. She looked at me with those dark eyes and said, "Thomas, I love you, and I promise you my family situation is something I'll explain better closer to the date. They probably won't be able to make it to the wedding anyway. Daddy's not well enough to travel. Please just trust me on this." I trusted her. God help me, I trusted her. Here is what changed that. About 3 months before the wedding, I was looking for a document on her laptop. She had asked me to pull up a confirmation email from our caterer while she was in the shower, and a folder on her desktop was open. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't suspicious in that active, searching way. I was just a man looking for an email. But the folder was labeled with a name I didn't recognize. Whitfield family. Do not open on shared devices. And I am a 62-year-old man with enough life behind me to know that when something is labeled that way, it means something. I am not proud of what I did next. I opened it. There were photographs inside, dozens of them. A family, an older couple, a younger man who must have been the brother, various gatherings, Christmas mornings, a birthday cake with what looked like 70 on it. These people were real. They existed. But they were not what I expected. The house in the background of most photos was modest. A double wide with a neat little garden out front. The father, Earl, I assumed, was wearing overalls in most pictures. The mother was heavy-set, gray-haired, with the kind of face that has spent a lot of years smiling at people. They looked like good people. Simple, yes. Unpretentious, absolutely. But warm. That warmth came through even in photographs on a stranger's laptop screen. That alone might not have stopped me cold. But then, I found a second subfolder. Inside it were screenshots of text messages between Diane and her brother Danny. The most recent one was from 8 months ago, 2 months after Diane and I had started dating. Danny had written, "Mom keeps asking when she's going to meet Thomas. You need to tell them something, Diane. This isn't right." Diane had responded, "Tell her I'll call." And Danny, I need you to keep them from reaching out directly. I'll handle this when I'm ready. Danny, handle what? What are you ashamed of? They're our parents. Diane had not responded to that last message. I sat there in her living room for a long time after I closed the laptop. I heard the shower shut off. I heard her moving around in the bathroom. I sat very still. I am not a man who panics easily. I spent 35 years in construction management. I have stood on job sites where things were going wrong in multiple directions at once and kept my head clear. But this was different. This was something I had to think through carefully before I did anything at all. I did not say a word to Diane that evening. I made us dinner. I watched television. I kissed her goodnight when she left. And then I drove home and sat in my kitchen until 2 in the morning working out what I needed to do. I needed to meet Ruth and Earl Whitfield. I needed to do it without Diane knowing. And I needed to do it before I made any decisions about anything else. Harlan, Kentucky is not a quick drive from Chattanooga. It's close to 4 hours through mountain roads that don't forgive you for not paying attention. I left on a Saturday morning in early April, told Diane I was driving up to visit my son in Knoxville for the weekend, which was half true, because I did stop and see my son Marcus on the way back, and I pointed my truck northeast and drove. I want to tell you about that drive, because it gave me time to think about what I was actually doing. I was 62 years old, driving through the mountains of eastern Tennessee toward a town I'd never been to knock on the door of a woman I had almost married and introduce myself to the parents she had hidden from me. I had a lot of miles to think about what that meant, about what it said about her, about what it said about me for not pressing harder, sooner. I found the address through public records, property records for Earl and Ruth Whitfield in Harlan County, which took me about 20 minutes on a county assessor website. The house was on a road called Sycamore Ridge, about 6 miles outside of town. I pulled into the driveway just before noon. It was exactly what the photographs had shown me. A double-wide, well-kept. A small vegetable garden along one side that hadn't been planted yet for the season but had been turned and was waiting. A porch with 2 wooden rocking chairs and a ceramic pot of early daffodils beside the door. It was the kind of place where you could feel that someone had taken care of it for a long time, not money, care. Before I could even reach the porch steps, the front door opened. A woman came out, Ruth Whitfield. I was certain, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was probably late 70s, gray-haired as expected, with the kind of eyes that assess you quickly but not unkindly. She looked at me with open curiosity. "Can I help you?" she said. I told her my name. I told her I was Diane's fiancée. Ruth Whitfield went very still. It was a particular kind of stillness, not surprise exactly. More like something she had been quietly waiting for had finally arrived at her door. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Earl, come out here, please." Earl Whitfield appeared in the doorway behind her. He was a tall man, thinner than he'd looked in the photographs, moving carefully in the way that men move when their body has started to make its opinions known about what it will and won't do. He was wearing a flannel shirt and work pants, and he looked at me with eyes that were measuring something. "This is Thomas," Ruth said to him. "Diane's Thomas." Earl looked at me for a moment, and then he said, "Well, you'd better come inside. Friends, I have been in a lot of rooms in my life. I have sat across tables from hard men in difficult negotiations. I have had conversations that changed the shape of my life. But I do not know that I have ever sat in a room that held so much quiet grief as Ruth and Earl Whitfield's kitchen that Saturday afternoon in April. Ruth made coffee. She put out a plate of cookies that I understood she had baked that morning for no particular reason except that baking was something she did. Earl sat across from me with his hands flat on the table, and we talked. They knew about me, they said. Danny had told them some things, pieced together from what little Diane shared with him. They knew I was from Nashville, that I worked in construction, that I was a widower, which was not entirely accurate. I'm divorced, but close enough that I understood how the information had traveled. They knew we were engaged. They had not been told about a wedding date. She hasn't called us since Christmas, Ruth told me, and she said it without accusation, just as a fact. I sent her a card for her birthday in February. I don't know if she received it. I asked them directly because I believe in asking things directly why they thought Diane had kept them at a distance from our relationship. Ruth and Earl exchanged a look that I recognized. It's the look two people exchange when they have already talked about something many times and have not reached a conclusion that satisfies either of them. Earl spoke carefully. We're not, he started. We're plain people, Thomas. We always have been. I worked the mines for 30 years. Ruth kept house and raised our children. We didn't have much, but we never went without. When Diane went off to college, she became someone else. Not bad. Just different. She started being embarrassed. He paused. We noticed. We told ourselves it would pass. It didn't pass, Ruth said quietly. She told me that Diane had brought a boyfriend home once, years ago, maybe 15 years back. A man from a good family. She said Diane had been visibly uncomfortable the entire visit, had corrected the way her father spoke at dinner, had made a comment about the house afterward that Ruth had overheard. The boyfriend had been kind, she said. He hadn't seemed to notice or care about any of it. But Diane had been mortified by the visit and had never brought anyone home again. I sat with that. I sat with the image of this woman. I thought I knew this confident, self-possessed woman who talked about the Tennessee Volunteers like she owned the team, sitting at this kitchen table when she was in her 30s, correcting her father's grammar and being ashamed of a ceramic pot of flowers on a porch. Then Ruth said something I have thought about almost every day since. She folded her hands around her coffee cup and she said, Thomas, I don't know why she does what she does, but I know my daughter. And I know that the woman she is on the inside, the real Diane, the little girl I raised, she is not cruel. She is frightened. She has been frightened her whole life of not being enough. I just wish, she stopped, started again. I just wish she had figured out that she always was. I had to look out the window for a moment. Before I left, Earl walked me out to my truck. He shook my hand with a grip that still had 30 years of the mines in it. He looked at me steadily, and he said, I'm not going to tell you what to do, son. That's your life and your decision. But I'm glad you came. Whatever comes of it. I drove 3 hours before I stopped for gas and sat in a parking lot and just breathed for a while. I did not end things with Diane the next day. I want to be honest about that. I spent 2 more weeks thinking. I told myself I needed to be fair. I told myself maybe there was an explanation, a context I didn't have, a wound in her history I hadn't seen yet. I gave her the opportunity to tell me herself. 3 times in those 2 weeks I created space in our conversation where she could have brought it up. She did not. She talked about flower arrangements and seating charts and whether my son Marcus was bringing a date. The night I made my decision, we were at a dinner with 4 of her colleagues from the accounting firm where she was a senior partner. Nice restaurant. Diane was at her most polished, animated, funny, charming, the person she had built herself into over 30 years of careful construction. Someone asked her about her family, the way people do at dinners like that, just making conversation. And she said, with perfect composure, Oh, my parents passed several years ago. I don't have much family left. I put down my fork. I looked at her. She did not look back at me. Ruth and Earl Whitfield were alive and well on Sycamore Ridge in Harlan, Kentucky. Earl was working on the vegetable garden. Ruth was making cookies for no particular reason. I excused myself from the table. I went to the men's room and stood at the sink and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. Then I went back to the table and I sat through the rest of that dinner with my hands in my lap and my face arranged in a reasonable expression. And that night, when I drove Diane home, I told her I needed to have a conversation with her in the morning. She knew, I think, from the way I said it. The next morning I arrived at her place at 9 o'clock with coffee and a clear head. I sat across from her at her kitchen table, the expensive glass-top table in her well-decorated Chattanooga condo, 4 hours from a double-wide on Sycamore Ridge, and I told her what I knew. I told her I had been to Harlan. I told her I had sat in her parents' kitchen and drunk her mother's coffee. I told her that Ruth had sent her a birthday card in February. I told her what Earl had said to me when he shook my hand in the driveway. I did not say any of it with anger. I want to be clear about that, friends. I said it the same way you deliver a report on something that has already happened, calmly, completely. I watched her face while I talked, and I watched something in it, something that had been held very tightly for a very long time, slowly come apart. She cried. Real tears, not performance. I believe that. She said she was sorry. She said she had been going to tell me, that she had always meant to tell me, that she didn't know how the lie had grown so large, so fast. She said her parents were good people and she knew that. She had always known that. She didn't know how to bring them into the life she'd built. She didn't know how to explain the distance between where she started and where she was. I listened to all of it. Then I took the engagement ring out of my jacket pocket. She had been wearing it. I had asked her to take it off the night before, and told her I needed it back for a reason I hadn't explained, and I set it on the glass table between us. Not dramatically, just set it down. I told her that the person I wanted to spend the rest of my life with was someone I could know completely, not just the Chattanooga version, not just the polished, composed, tailored version. All of it, the beginning and the middle and the complicated parts too. I told her I was 62 years old and I did not have the time or the desire to build a life on a foundation I hadn't been allowed to see. I told her I hoped she would call her parents. Then I got up and I picked up my coffee cup and I washed it in her sink because I was raised to clean up after myself, and I walked out. I called Marcus from the parking garage. Told him I needed to talk. He drove down from Knoxville the next day, and we sat on my back porch, and I told him the whole story. He's 34, my son, and he's a good man, and he just listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I'm most proud of about him. You okay, Dad? He asked when I finished. I thought about it honestly. I will be, I told him. Here is what I know now, friends, that I didn't know when I was 26 or even 50. I know that the way a person treats the people they started with, the parents, the brothers and sisters, the people who knew them before they had anything to prove, tells you more about who they are than anything else ever will. It is not about money or status or what kind of house you grew up in. It is about whether you can look at where you came from and say, that is part of me and I am not ashamed of it. Diane could not do that. And I don't say that with contempt. I genuinely believe Ruth was right. That Diane was frightened, that the shame she carried was something that had grown in her for a long time before I ever came along. I hope she found her way through it. I hope she called them. What I can tell you is this. About 6 weeks after I walked out of that condo, I drove back up to Harlan. I didn't call ahead. I just drove up on a Saturday, stopped at a barbecue place I'd seen on my first visit that looked like it knew what it was doing, and I picked up enough food for 4 people. Then I drove out to Sycamore Ridge. Ruth answered the door again. She looked at me, and then at the bags in my hands, and then back at me. Last time I was here, I told her, I left without staying for lunch. That didn't seem right. She laughed. It was a full, real laugh, and it took about 10 years off her face. Earl came out from the back of the house where he'd been starting on the garden. We ate on that porch with the rocking chairs and the daffodils, which had bloomed into something considerable by then. We talked about the mines in Nashville and construction, and whether the volunteers had any hope for the fall season. We stayed there 3 hours. When I stood up to go, Ruth took my hand in both of hers and held it for a moment. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I'm not telling you this story because I want you to feel sorry for me. I don't want your pity. I had a lucky escape, and I'm old enough to know it. I'm telling you this because I think about Earl Whitfield shaking my hand in that driveway, and the dignity in it, and the way he said, I'm not going to tell you what to do, son, and I think about how much grace it took for that man to say that. He had been erased by his own daughter. He had watched her build a life that had no room for him in it, and he still had the decency not to ask me for anything. That is what good people look like, friends. And they don't always live in the places we think to look for them. The people who shaped us, who packed our lunches and patched our knees and sat up worrying when we were late, coming home, they don't stop being worth knowing just because we've moved on and built something new. If anything, they become more worth knowing, because now you can see them clearly, without the impatience of youth. Whoever loved you at the beginning is still the truest map of who you are. Go find them. Have lunch on the porch. A small note for you. Friends, this story was created and fictionalized by AI, written to bring you an entertaining listen while also leaving something real behind. The reminder that the people who loved us first deserve to be loved back, out loud, while there's still time.